Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Microbiology Unveiled. Today we will be exploring the incredible protozoa Giardia Lamblia.
Excuse me, Natalie, but this microorganism actually has a total of 4 names. In addition to its scientific name, Giardia Lamblia, it is also known as Giardia intestinalis or Giardia duodenalis, or the layman's term for it, beaver fever.
Really? 4 names for a single microorganism? Thank you, Katie, for that interesting fact. Today, Professor Katie Ellis joins me, your host, Natalie Miller, as we dive into the topic of Giardia.
As Natalie has said, I'm indeed a professor of microbiology. However, my true passion lies within this amazing microorganism, and I have dedicated my life to its study.
Fascinating, fascinating. So, what can you tell us about this little animal?
Well, Giardia is a wonderful protozoa. Its workings within the body and its ingenuity of self-defense and all of it point to its amazing design that have allowed it to live in our world for this long and to become the most common non-bacterial cause of gastroenteritis.
The most common non-bacterial cause? How many people does it affect on average?
Approximately 33% of people in developing countries have had Giardia.
Oh my. How is it possible for Giardia to affect so many? And where would we find this microorganism? And how is it contracted?
Well, Natalie, that is quite an insightful question. Typically, it is transported through the water, soil, or on food. Water is the most common mode of its transportation. This can be through both treated and untreated water, as there may not be enough chlorine in the normal treatment to rid the water of Giardia. Contaminated foods that haven't been exposed to high heat in order to kill the organism are also common transporters of Giardia. The people who are most likely to contract it then are those who do not have access to treated water contaminated by feces. An interesting high-risk area for Giardia contamination is surprisingly within a daycare setting. Giardia microorganisms are expelled from the body through the children's feces, and if childcare workers do not wash their hands after changing dirty diapers, then the microorganisms can be transferred to any toy, mouth, or surface imaginable via the contaminated hands and infect other unsuspecting children running around the daycare.
Dear, oh dear, those poor innocent children. What happens to them once they've ingested contaminated food or water or touched anything with Giardia on it?
I have to admit, this is the point where it gets really interesting. Once a person contracts the protozoa, which I must add is in its cyst form.
Wait, cyst form? Professor, I have no idea what that is. Please, enlighten our audience as well.
My apologies, Natalie, and to our listeners. When Giardia is out and about in the environment, it remains in its cyst form. This means that it is inactive and unable to transmit any unfriendly effects. It is also much more protected by any hostile environment because it has secreted a tough, thick cuticle wall that has enveloped its body in a sphere-like shape.
Does this feature have a name?
Why, yes it does. The cyst wall is known as a virulence factor, a feature produced by the protozoa which contributes to its pathogenicity. In this state, it is called the ERIF, or the environmentally resistant infectious form.
So, what happens when it enters into an environment that's not hostile? And what is an example of this sort of environment?
An example of this would be inside of our bodies.
Our bodies?
Yes. Our warm, nutrient-filled intestines provide a perfect environment for our friend to live in, and here it develops into its active state as a trophozoite.
So it goes from being an inactive, harmless cyst to a pathogenic trophozoite?
Essentially, yes. The bile in our small intestines will cause the cyst to dissolve its lipid layer, and it also informs the microorganism that it has now entered into our body. Once the lipid layer has been dissolved, the cyst will divide itself into 2 organisms, each with their own flagella. These new organisms will then take on the name as trophozoites.
All of this is so amazing. What happens next?
I'm glad you're interested in this. I am, as well, as you can see. The trophozoites, which entered our bodies through our mouths, will then travel into our small intestines, where they will make their new home. They travel to the first portion of the small intestines, called the duodenum, where they will germinate, and then they will make their way to the jejunum, where they will then use another one of their virulent factors, which are their suction discs. These they will use to attach themselves to the insides of our small intestines, so they are not excreted with the waste, and then they will feed on epithelial cells, causing inflammation and blood in the stool.
That sounds awful.
Yes, it truly is. And to make it even worse, inflammation and bloody stool can be accompanied by fatigue, flatulence, distended abdomen, and dehydration. It can also cause long-term problems such as lactose intolerance and weight loss. The major symptom, however, is going to be diarrhea. These symptoms generally last up to 6 weeks.
Yikes! Is there a name for this syndrome?
When someone is affected by Giardia, they are said to have contracted giardiasis.
Say that again?
It is giardiasis.
Giardiasis. Okay, so how would I know if I had giardiasis? By having a lot of diarrhea?
This can be one of the indicators of this disease. In fact, this is one of the main signs that doctors look for when they are diagnosing it. Doctors generally use 4 different ways to diagnose this disease. They look for normal signs and symptoms of giardiasis, and they view the history of the patient as well. Most commonly, they will take multiple stool samples, since the microorganism is not consistently shed in the stool, so they need more than one to identify it. If these 3 diagnostic tools are not enough, they may choose to perform an enteroscopy, which is putting a long tube down the throat into the small intestine to view the inside of intestine for inflammation and to possibly take a sampling.
You know, that sounds kind of intrusive. Isn't there some antibiotic or something someone could take instead?
There are antibiotics, yes, but a person has to be diagnosed first. Once it is confirmed that this person has giardiasis, then they can move on to treatment. First of all, the patient is encouraged to drink a lot of fluids, which, because of diarrhea, also will cause dehydration sometimes. If Giardia doesn't run its course in a timely manner, then the doctor will most likely prescribe some sort of antibiotic. Commonly, they'll prescribe metronidazole, which will selectively disrupt parasite metabolism.
Is there a way to stop this from happening before Giardia even enters the body?
There are a few precautions that each person can easily take. The first would be washing your hands. This is the simplest preventative measure that should be a frequent habit for all of us. Giardia can be killed by exposure to high heat, such as boiling, as well as contact with ozone and iodine.
Well, thank you, Professor Katie, for talking on this subject and for educating both myself and our listeners on the microorganism Giardia. It has been a fascinating episode of Microbiology Unveiled. However, our time is coming to a close and we must end our discussion for the day.
It has been my pleasure, Natalie.
And with that, we wish you all a wonderful, health-filled day, free of our new friend, Giardia.